both the House and the Senate to kick off today's press conference. So you'll see, true to form, last session we did weekly press conferences. We will be doing that again this session. For those in the press who want to be following what's happening throughout the session, I encourage you to join us each week, likely right here, right after session on Tuesdays, and we look forward to seeing you there to cover different topics. As you all know, last week a monumental decision was made by Maine's Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, in my opinion, in an attempt to get national headlines. There's been other cases that have been overturned in other state courts, and I expect that the same is likely going to be the case here in Maine. She attempted to remove President Donald Trump from the ballot for the future, the upcoming presidential election, in a unilateral move that, in my opinion, was extra constitutional, and I think even her decision speaks for itself in that regard. What I will say, though, and you probably heard me remark on this on some other headlines, is that she is, in fact, the best thing that Donald Trump has going for him right now. By helping to stir up our base and motivate our folks, I can tell you that the Republican base in Maine is incredibly energized over this. We've been hearing constantly from our constituents, and we will do everything that we can to change this decision. It is going to play out in the courts, which is a different branch of government, but I will say that Maine's Secretary of State is elected by the legislature. And so if you are at all dissatisfied by this decision, I encourage you to vote accordingly in November. That way we can remove this Secretary of State and move on to one that is going to represent your interests better in this building and across the state. With that, I am going to turn it over to House of Representatives Republican leader Billy Bob Falkingham, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. I'm House Republican leader Billy Bob Falkingham. Thanks for joining us today. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows has demonstrated herself unfit for the office of Secretary of State with this decision. She has made a decision that threatens to throw our country into chaos. It's a decision that you would see in banana republics and not something that you would see in a great republic like the United States of America. She has, in removing him from President Trump from the ballot, she has made a decision that she doesn't even take seriously herself. By suspending her decision, she acknowledges that it was a wrong decision. So that strikes to me as a purely political move. A political move that has very terrifying and dangerous consequences. A move that says, I as a Secretary of State have the ability to remove someone from the ballot just based on my own personal feelings with no adjudication of the law. This is a terrifying, and disastrous decision that you could see copied by other Secretary of States in other states that would throw our nation into absolute pandemonium. What's the result of this? Who knows? Could now Republican Secretaries of State remove Joe Biden from the ballot? What would our country become if people nonchalantly carried out decisions like this? And this speaks to the absolute partisanship of the office of the Secretary of State because it is elected in a partisan manner by the legislature. It's a horrible process that may have been good in 1820, but it's not good now. When you aren't accountable to the people of the state of Maine and you're only accountable to a partisan legislature, that is how you get away with making decisions like this. And in my mind, she has proven herself unfit for the office, and she has lost the confidence of the Maine people. We've all standing here have been reached out to by people that, yes, the ones that support Trump, but we've been reached out by many constituents who say they would never vote for Donald Trump and are outraged by this decision, absolutely outraged. And so the fact that this decision was opposed by Susan Collins, Senator King, and Congressman Golden, all three of which who voted to impeach Donald Trump, speaks volumes. And the Secretary of State has jumped in way over her boots on this one. And that's where she stands right now, but she is unfit for the office.
Okay, I'm sure folks have questions, so we'll use what little bit of time we have remaining today to answer some of those. Yep.
A couple of questions. First of all, what was it specifically that you objected to the way that Secretary Bellows interpreted the Constitution in their ruling?
Right. I think the biggest thing is that Donald Trump, whether you like the guy or don't like the guy, has not been convicted or even charged with insurrection. There is a legal definition of that, and yet she's backed in with the ends basically justifying the means of her decision here. I think the outcome was pre-scripted, and then she used whatever so-called evidence, and by the way, the rules of evidence don't apply in those hearings like they would in a courtroom. So the whole thing just kind of smacked of trying to back into the justification, which is what she wanted ultimately, to do two things. One, attempt to remove Donald Trump from the Republican ballot, but two, to obviously garner national press and headlines in order to position herself better for some future exploit.
Second question, if
Yep.
you don't mind. Are you looking at changing the powers of the Secretary of State in Maine? Maine being one of the few states where the Secretary of State does have the power to do this. It's something that we're not seeing in a state like Colorado, who's going through sort of a similar process, but in their state, obviously, they are looking at the state Supreme Court who made that ruling. Is this something you guys are interested in or think that this is attainable?
I know that there are some other states that have some pending legislation that speaks to that exact dynamic to make sure that the Secretary of States that maybe of a different party can't put their thumb on the scales and prevent these outcomes from happening in the future. I expect that'll be something that is discussed this term, but the reality is that the Democrats are in control of letting what legislation even is considered or heard over the next 4 months. So highly unlikely that that'll pass in Maine, but absolutely an idea that we're exploring. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, so we're also seeing, Maine is a slightly different state than some other states where the constitutional officers are elected by the legislature, like you said, is changing how constitutional officers are elected, making them elected by the people, something that you guys are looking at.
Yeah, and I think Representative Falkenham spoke to this too. I'll give him another opportunity to weigh in. I think certainly that's something that's on the table here, not likely to happen in this legislature for all the reasons I just explained, and would take a constitutional amendment. I think the first and most important thing here is that people need to understand how these folks get into these positions in the first place, right? We took civics out of school a long time ago, and now we're paying the price. The reality is that these folks are elected, backroom deals are made behind the scenes and behind the curtain, and yet and a secret ballot, right? And their elected representatives are the ones that hand select these folks. Oftentimes, they're their friends. And so if we're going to have a system that's actually accountable to the people and actually going to be responsible to the people, we have to get away from this model of behind closed doors decisions that are selecting these folks, whether it's Attorney General, who has had a litany of problems himself over the last couple of years, or the Secretary of State, State Treasurer, and also included as a state auditor. Representative.
Yeah, that's a bill that Republicans have put in and sponsored and continue to support having the people of Maine elect those positions. Just want to speak back to your question also as far as the Secretary of State's decision. She focuses on an obscure part of the 14th Amendment that was written right after the Civil War that was meant to keep Confederate generals from serving in Congress. And she's ignoring that the most important part of the 14th Amendment is the Equal Protection Clause, which is the right to every person to due process. And she's completely violated Donald Trump's right to due process in making that decision. So it's just, once again, it's a sham decision and could throw our country into chaos.
Yeah, Randy.
So will you guys seek a formal impeachment of Bellows this session, or are you backing off that given the political control of each chamber?
Starts in the House, so I'll let you take that one first.
Yep. It does start in the House. That has been filed by Representative Andrews.
It has been filed?
It has been filed.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about that, what the plan is for its schedule, when it might come up, what you're expecting?
Go ahead.
I don't have a timeline other than it wasn't on the, didn't make it on the calendar today, but I think it will probably make it on the calendar by next week.
There were some calls, I think, for Secretary to resign as well today. Would you care to talk about that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of calls that all make good sense, that she could resign, that she could recuse herself from officiating over the presidential election, since she's proven herself to be clearly biased, not only through this decision but in previous statements. So The people of Maine have lost confidence in her, and that's across the board. That's Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. People of Maine have lost confidence in her ability to oversee the elections. She's said herself that the most important thing is the integrity of elections and for people to have trust in elections, and she has betrayed that.
States oversee their own elections, and the Secretary of State's decision essentially puts this before a Maine state court. Is that not the right venue to determine this? I mean, do you trust the courts will reach the appropriate decision, and if so?
Well, so I want to be clear about that. She didn't have to go down this road. She chose to go down this road. She chose to go down this road in order to try to make national headlines for some sort of political agenda and future mission that she has. That was her choice. Now, it was the wrong choice, I think, and I think that what you're going to find is that the other branch of state government is in fact going to agree that that was the wrong choice, that there is no basis to do that, as we've seen in other states that have met the same outcome there in their state courts. So I think, does she have the ability to do this? Yes. Should she have done it? Absolutely not. The safeguards were put in place for a reason, and just because you don't like some guy doesn't mean that you should completely remove an otherwise a legitimate application to be on Maine's ballot. Yes?
In the decision that she wrote, she said that under the law she doesn't need to wait for a court to find him guilty because Congress already wrote a report about his acts in the January 5th riots. So what do you have to say about that? That was the evidence that she used to make the decision.
Yeah, and again, that's not actually conforming to the rules of Maine evidence. When you are in a courtroom, you are going to have to conform to those rules. And so what is actually admitted and what is not is a different standard than what was used in this case with a bunch of YouTube videos that were used to find this guy ineligible to run for office in Maine. I think what you're going to find is the court's going to overturn this decision. Yep.
How much of the caucus supports impeachment right now, whether the people in this room or what you've gotten to
Well, look, I'll hand it back to Billy Bob in just a second, but I will say, look, if the Senate, if it does get to the point that there is an impeachment hearing, the Senate will absolutely hold a fair and impartial hearing on that process, something that wasn't afforded to Donald Trump in this case by Maine Secretary of State. I don't know if it's going to get that far. I'll let the House leader speak on that point. But if it does come to the Senate, we will do our job and hold a fair and impartial hearing and get to the bottom of this.
I think it's fair to say that it's universal that everybody agrees that she made a decision that was way outside of her scope, and that everybody feels that she's definitely unfit for the office.
Okay, one more.
Please.
Yep.
Is it true Shenna Bellows was an elector for Joe Biden? And if so, doesn't that mean a conflict of interest for her making such a decision against Donald Trump?
Whether that's a conflict of interest, I'll let the people of Maine make up their mind on that decision. But yeah, one more from Randy. Yeah.
Can I change the topic to guns? I mean, obviously there was a huge crowd here today. They filled the State House. What do you guys make of the showing today for more gun safety legislation, and what plans do you guys have for any sort of gun legislation?
Yeah, certainly emotions are high on both sides of that issue. I think, to be fair, both sides were well represented under the dome today, both on the pro and anti side of that question. But I do think that there's a lot of work to still do to unpack exactly what happened and exactly went wrong. And we're committed to getting to the bottom of that and figuring out where the errors actually were in order to put our best foot forward from a policy-making standpoint that's going to be balancing the need to keep people safe in Maine, which we are all obviously committed to, with constitutional rights that people have and that otherwise shouldn't be hindered because of bad legislation that's put forward. So I think there's a fine line to walk there, but we are committed to figuring out what happened and making sure that we have a plan to keep folks safe in Maine. I'm going to leave it there, I think, and let folks get off to committee. And thank you all again for joining us. Next week, it'll be Tuesday afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much. Good job. Thanks.